This is a building block matrix where elements 1, 2, 4, and 5 serve as our building blocks, and when combined, they give us the elements in our third row and our third column. For the purposes of time, I am only going to be focusing on combining elements from left to right. However, you can apply the same logic I will explain to all of your columns to still get the same answer. Starting in row 1, we are combining similar colored squares together. So the black squares will combine together between elements and the white squares will combine together between elements. If the white squares are both on the same side of this kind of dividing line here, so for in this instance they're both on the left, we would add all of these black squares together. So 1 plus 3 will give us 4 black squares. And because the most amount of black squares appeared on the left, the black squares will be on the left in our final answer in our third element. Now let's take a look at the white squares. The same logic applies. If they're on the same side of the dividing line, we will add them together. So we need 2 plus 1 will give us 3. And the most amount of white squares was on the right-hand side, which means the most amount of white squares will be on the right-hand side in our final answer. So taking a look at our second row, and starting with the black squares, we have 3 that are on the right and then 1 that's on the left. So now we're seeing an example where they're on opposite sides of the dividing line, which means we're going to subtract them. So we should have 2 black squares left over. The most black squares showed up on the right, so that means in our final answer, the black squares are going to be on the right. Now we have 4 white squares and 3 white squares. Again, they're on opposite sides of the dividing line, so we're going to subtract them, leaving us with just 1. And because the most amount of white squares showed up on the left, the white squares will be on the left in our final answer. So now we take a look at our final row, the one with our missing element in it. And we see we have 2 black squares, 4 black squares. They're on opposite sides of the dividing line, so we're going to need to subtract them. And then we have 4 white squares and 2 white squares. Again, opposite sides of the dividing line, so we'll need to subtract them, meaning we're going to have 2 white squares on the right, because the most amount of white squares showed up on the right. And we're going to have 2 black squares on the left because the most amount of black squares showed up on the left. And that matches answer choice C.